I'm Cheryl.
And I'm Naima. We're three Black moms.
I have this comedian that I follow amongst many. I think it's Bowtie Comedy. But in reference to our subject today about profanity, this is what he said. He was speaking to the audience and he goes, "Now I'm a Christian and I don't curse out loud." So what is it with the world turning into coarse and bad language? I'm in a class at UNF, and the language that came out of my co-students' mouths as they were practicing and learning their comedy was amazing to me. I thought, has everyone lost their vocabulary? Well, as the world is racing toward its own destruction, Scripture tells us in Ephesians, do not let any unwholesome talk come out of your mouths, but only what is helpful for building others up according to their needs, that it may benefit those who listen. And it also says, do not use foul or abusive language. Let everything you say be good and helpful, so that your words will be an encouragement to those who hear. Let no corrupting talk come out of your mouths, but only such that is good for building up as fits the occasion, that it may give grace to those who hear. Now, I had an occasion once to be in a car with a friend who was making all kinds of jokes about other people. And someone reminded him that obscene stories, foolish talk, coarse jokes, these are not for you. Instead, let there be thankfulness to God. So why is there so much profanity when we have a myriad of words we can use to describe things? There are words when we were kids we were not allowed to say. You weren't allowed to call someone ignorant or stupid or dumb. Those were the bad words in our household. Sisters, why is the world rushing towards so much profanity? What are your thoughts? One of the things that I consider to be really in bad form are when people think things are funny and they say something extremely outrageous and you're looking at them like, why do you think that's funny?
Well, you know what I have seen a lot of these days, TV shows and even movies where they have little children saying words that we grew up knowing were bad words, so to speak. But now it's considered funny. And I have even kind of checked some of my friends when I was younger. We all were raising our children together, and they'd have their little 2-year-old and everybody's child is just learning how to speak. And they would teach them words that we knew were considered profanity. And they would think it was cute when their little 2-year-old would repeat the word. That's so cute. Well, you know how children are. They like to entertain. So if you respond positively to something that they say, they'll say it again and again and again. So, I'm seeing that that's one of the things that happen. And then a lot of these TV shows, I know what was it, Homer Simpson used to say little, rude things. So that seemed to kind of set in motion a whole thing of let's entertain the children by having them use curse words. And then everybody's child suddenly got this rude behavior. And what do you do when it's seen on TV?
Well, this is interesting because I think we're going to age ourselves, ladies.
Probably.
Because we grew up, we're all baby boomers, okay? So let's put that out there, which means that we are all 60 plus.
60s children, yeah.
And we're children who grew up in a household where maybe your parents cursed, but you knew better than even saying lying, heifer, the word butt.
I forgot about heifer.
Right. Forget the B word or the S
You can't
word.
even call somebody a cow. Yeah, that was bad.
Like damn and hell, you did not say, even though you could say, well, those are in the Bible. You did not
Right.
say that.
You didn't say
They
them.
were not said and they were never said on television. Remember when Gone with the Wind came out, it was a big deal that, you know, the man says, frankly, my dear, I don't give a damn. That was huge. In the 80s, when Archie Bunker came out, that was the first time you ever heard a toilet flush or even had people acknowledging that people use the toilet. Earlier, there were people who were supposedly married people who slept in twin beds. So there was a lot of unreal work, but we've gotten a little bit too real, I think. And the FCC, the Federal Communications whatever, I can't even think of what all the C's stand for, but they used to keep a lot tighter control on what could be said. There are no censors now, it seems to me. And I remember also when it was shocking when the Nixon tapes came out that the president used coarse language. Now, the current occupant of the White House uses coarse language all the time and he's cheered. And I think it's because we are
Decadent.
we have gotten to the point where we don't have the worst people have no filters. No one has any filters anymore. They say what they think. You know, the social media is out there, and a lot of times people used to say, especially in the 80s and 90s, words used to come, and when people would say it either in the movies or even on television, if you could say something, it was for shock value. We're not shocked anymore.
Right.
You know, and even some words may not be profane, but they have bad connotations, and they have a bad root or a beginning. The word sucks. Everybody says stuff. Oh, that sucks. That actually is a sexual innuendo, and we used to think of that as a vulgarity. Saying somebody is pissed, that used to be considered a vulgarity. A lot of the things, as we have started to use words that we thought were vulgar, not necessarily profane, but vulgar, when we started to use them in the current lexicon, it's easier to use the F word. And now I teach college students, and yes, they are allowed to use whatever they want. These are grown folks. You speak however you need to speak to make yourself understood. And I don't get on them for that, because it's about them feeling heard in some ways. And if they need to use a profane or what we used to call a bad word, go ahead. You know what? Y'all are grown. However, if I were teaching younger students, I would not allow that, and I would also make sure that I didn't use that language too. So I'm not admitting to anyone, or I'm not admitting anything to anyone what I say in my classes. But I will say that I would not use that language around children. In fact, it's funny. We tried very hard not to even curse around Sarah. Now it's like, okay, you're 26 years old now. We can speak as we speak, and she'll say, "Oh, you're grown." She won't speak that way in front of us because she uses it as a sign of respect. And that used to be the other thing. You used to think about talking that way to your elders and not talking that way as a sign of respect. And we have no respect for anyone anymore.
Well, that's the thing that I see as missing when you see children curse at their parents. That was unheard of in our time. We know that. Yeah, our parents said things, and we knew which words we can repeat and which words we couldn't. And you just didn't, like you say, as a sign of respect. Now, when I was teaching high school, yeah, but yeah, in your household, yeah, you fear the consequences. But when I was teaching high school, and the policy of the school was, you know, if a student used a curse word, you're supposed to suspend them or whatever, write them up for detention, something. There was supposed to be some kind of consequences. But they cursed all the time. And, you know, when you know, if I would say something to them, they didn't even hear that they had said it. So rather than me try to bust somebody out all out in public, I would just quietly walk over to them and just kind of whisper in their ear, "You're showing everybody how your mother talks to you in your household." You know, well, what did I say? What did I say? You know, and of course, everybody in the class, they knew that's what I did. I never blasted anybody. They knew I was reprimanding them for what they had just said. But
well,
one day,
as a parent, I think it is really important to be the example to your children. There are words like you were mentioning, Cheryl, some of those words that everyone says, but they have a sexual connotation or a bathroom connotation or something. I do not allow my grandson to say those words. When he has said those words, I have offered him other ways of expressing his feeling of disgust or displeasure. I said, that's not a nice word. Oh, well, my parents say it or my friends say it. And I says, it's still not a nice word. And Grandma Barbara says, let's not say that word. Let's say this. And, I will give him other words to say, because I think as parents, we have to be mindful of the words we speak, how we express ourselves, and the things we say to our children, our children's friends, and even the children that we're watching. Sometimes a bad word might slip out because you've gotten used to talking that way. Train yourself not to talk that way. Why do we have to use profanity to express ourselves? I understand young people have to do that because they may not have grasped enough of the vocabulary of language to express what they're trying to say. But it is important to train and teach people because you want that to be respectful. I remember when the mayor of Chicago, Mayor Daley Sr., said the first bad word, and everybody was like, whoa, horrified, because this is a position where you are not supposed to be using gutter language. You are a person who is in charge of the city, and you are a person who is supposed to be representing the city to other cities and states, and you're talking like you came out of the gutter. So, and I would like to also put out there, I actually have an article on my website called 7 Reasons for Swearing. And you can find this at pmet.org/docs, DOCS, /swearing HTML. Well, okay, it's not my article. My husband wrote this thing because it was a whole thing about Christians swearing and thinking that it was okay to swear because bad language is acceptable. So I just thought, we need to learn how to speak better, learn better. And something I found kind of hysterical, when young people are learning a new language, they want to know what are all the bad words so they can curse in another language.
That is ridiculous. But that's just how young people are. They want to know what are the bad words. So they can...
And that is exactly what people always ask. When I was over in Japan 30-some years ago, those were some of the things that my friends' friends were asking me. Well, what are the curse words? They wanted to say these things, and they want to give, these different scenarios. What if a guy asks, such and such, and you want to tell him, to, more or less F off. So it's interesting that everyone wants to do that. And I've also noted that a lot of times younger people, when English is their second language, and this has happened, in my own community, they will say things that I'm shocked that they say it. And it's like, they're going, what the hell? And I'm like, looking at them like, why are you talking? Because they don't realize that is not acceptable or respectable language. And I don't want to be the respectability police. People speak how they speak. But if your best way of expressing yourself is your language, you can do a whole lot more, because there's all kinds of ways. If you really have to bless someone out, you can do it without ever saying a bad word, or using profanity whatsoever. And profanity has gotten to the point where it has lost its shock value anyway. So people are like, oh, whatever. And because of that, but you can speak so much better. But even more than that, I think that we need to start teaching our young people how to speak better, especially like those 2-year-olds and 3-year-olds. And if you're speaking like that, even if you're not talking to them, they are hearing it, and they will wait and try out that new word for grandma and grandpa or someone else, because they are listening. And so even if you're not talking to them, it's just like people who would watch things on television, and it would be some adult content, not necessarily sexual, but definitely way beyond what they needed to comprehend. And they would say, oh, they don't understand what they're talking about. And Barbara, you had mentioned the Simpsons, and I remember Sean used to watch the Simpsons with Sarah until she got old enough to understand it, and then he stopped watching it with her because it wasn't just this funny little cartoon anymore. And you wonder how much kids absorbed while people thinking, oh, they don't understand what they're saying. Kids were watching things like The Family Guy. When Sarah was in second grade, I remember her teacher was telling me that. So these kids are watching The Family Guy. And I says, that's not a cartoon for kids. And she says, I know. And that's the thing is, and so these kids, they come up with this inappropriate behavior, inappropriate language. I'm not going to say necessarily bad, but inappropriate for what they were trying to express. And then when their parents are called in, the parents are shocked that their kids are saying that and act like, well, I don't know where they hear it. We don't say that at home. Even if you don't say it at home in front of them, you're around other sources where they're getting it. And you can't always blame your neighbor's kids or your cousins or somebody else. It's you. It is.
Yes. This other thing that I realized, I think that even Americans have this tendency to promote profanity. I would be watching a Japanese movie with John, who speaks Japanese, John, my son, and he would say, they didn't say that. They said, you're too loud. But the words from the prompter on the bottom that's trying to, say what the language was, the American voices will say these bad words that had no connotation, and they really didn't say that in the film.
Yeah. Well, that's something we should think about.
You're too loud.
See, that's something we should think about. What is the agenda of people who are trying to, I guess, degrade the culture so that everybody speaks in vulgar language? Everybody is making either genitalia references whenever they speak. What is it with the people who are choosing to infuse this in the culture? Now, I did something in my classroom one time and they just laughed and laughed and laughed. But one day I wrote a list of all the curse words on the board. And I said, okay, now what we're going to do is come up with alternatives to each of these words.
Miss Lateef, you're going to get in trouble when the principal walks in here.
Yeah. And then I said, no, that's okay, because they'll just see that I'm teaching. So we came up with an alternative word for each of those curse words. Now you can just imagine. And so what happened, it kind of started a trend, because they're, after class, they're out in the hallway and they're saying these little alternative words. Get your adipose tissue over here. Now, of course, that kind of stuff,
But you're also teaching them vocabulary.
And that was the thing.
Alternative words.
So
with real meaning.
Each of those words had an alternative that sounded intelligent. And they were just getting the biggest kick out of saying those alternative words, that it got to be a thing where people were using that all the time. But what I learned is that if we teach good speech, then our children will speak it, because they're going to speak the language that we speak. And if we're saying words that have some kind of vulgar connotation, but we say it whenever we want to show emphasis for something, well, that's what they learn. These are the words you use when you want to emphasize that you're serious about what you're saying. So that's what all the, the F word and everything else becomes. I'm going to emphasize that I mean business when I say this word. So now it's being said. And to be honest, I mean, all of the politicians have thrown one of those words out there at some point. And I don't know if they wanted to seem like they were being modern or whatever, or appealing to the youth or whatever, but they've all chosen to throw that F word out there, which used to be, when we were growing up, that was totally the unsayable thing.
Unsayable.
You couldn't even think that word.
I know.
I mean, that was the kind of thing that when somebody would write it, you know, like when they're vandalizing something.
Yeah, that was the word you wrote when you were vandalizing.
Even the B word was something that was like the worst word.
Right. That was the vandalizing word. I mean, things that you just didn't say
all the time, you know.
Now it just becomes common speech. People calling each other that the thing.
No one even flinches anymore when they hear the F word. No matter whose mouth it comes out of. If it comes out of a baby's mouth, people don't flinch anymore. We have to start thinking. And I hate to think, and because I'm a wordsmith, we're all wordsmiths, and I hate to think that there are words that are bad words. They're just, I would like to think of them as most of the time unnecessary.
Yeah.
They're unnecessary. They're unnecessary for emphasis, and it doesn't necessarily lead to what you think it can. I know that I remember when I was reading a book about the history of rape in this country. I can't even remember what I think it's called. I can't even think of the name of it. It's like a story of rape or history. It's something about the history of rape and the country.
Yeah.
And they were saying that women, if you told somebody to F off, that it could end up coming back to haunt you, because if that person assaulted you, they could say, well, that word is sexually exciting. So that, even though, so it was like, because we're always, the perpetrators, even when we're the victims, is that we still have to police what other people do, as if we can control men's behaviors. But it's those kind of things where it's a word. It can be a word of violence and aggression, and they can turn that back off on you. And so it's those kind of things. And sometimes you do need to tell people to get out of your face, and maybe that's the only way they can understand. But let's not teach our children that is the only way. Just like we don't need to teach our girls that they should always be nice when someone is harassing them. And maybe sometimes you do need to tell somebody to F off if they're harassing you, but you also need to say it loud and make it plain to other people that you are being harassed, and that attention is not wanted.
And get your pepper spray out.
Get your pepper spray and your mace and your taser if you're in a state where they let you use those things. But don't use it for everything. And that's the thing, is that we have gotten to the point where profanity is so ingrained in our regular conversation that nobody even thinks about, that wasn't even necessary. That was unusually harsh, and that didn't give you what you needed to say. Profanity doesn't necessarily it doesn't necessarily need to be there, but people use it for an emphasis that doesn't necessarily need to be there.
Because they don't have, what is the quote? Profanity is the language of the person who doesn't have the vocabulary to express their thoughts.
Exactly.
So if you know enough words, use your words. I mean, I know that a lot of people believe that if they say something and use the shock value, I mean, I have friends who do this regularly as a way to emphasize if they want someone to know they're serious or they're upset or they're angry. But it gets to the point where you could actually have a lot more influence if you, number one, kept your voice calm, and number two, use all of the words that are dignified to express your thoughts. If that is your way, people will learn respect for that way, because that shows I am in control of myself, and I'm going to express exactly what I want you to understand.
Even if
it also represents a changed life. I had a friend, she's passed away now, but she was a former well-known madam of Chicago. Her name was Bunny Curry. Well, actually, that was her name on the streets, but she was Eileen Avanzano. And when she became a Christian, one of the first things she said that shocked all her friends was that she had stopped cursing because she was a changed person inside. She was no longer going to emulate any kind of filth because she was clean on the inside. She was a new person. She'd become a born again believer.
You remember that movie, Angels in the Outfield with Danny Glover?
Yes.
And, and he would cuss all the time. And then a little boy told him, but, the angels really don't like when you use that language. So he started, the angel be standing there and he'd get rid of curse and he kind of reform his words.
And everybody went, huh?
Yeah. But really, when on the inside, when you don't want to say something that you feel is a degradation, it just won't come out your mouth because it doesn't represent who you are.
And sometimes, like you said, Naima, sometimes you can make your voice heard by being quiet. Yeah. I mean, it's nice. Sometimes if you're in customer service and it's one of those call centers and they're talking over you and not listening, you really do want to cuss them out. You can ask for the manager, and sometimes you can just quietly say, "Don't make me come down there."
Yeah, I've said that.
Now, that's not a threat, because all you're saying is that you would like to appear in person to discuss this matter.
Maybe down there.
On the phone. I mean, there's a lot of ways we can express ourselves and our discontent without, using all the F words and all the other words and calling people out of their name and call them everything but a child of God. But, save those for when you absolutely need it.
But if you use it all the time, it loses its shock value and doesn't have the effect, right?
All its value. And
no obscenity, no filthiness, no coarse language. Those things are unsuitable.
Well, even though a word only has the meaning that you give it, if the general society in their own collective consciousness has agreed that this particular word or these sets of words are words that demonstrate vulgar speech or degrading language,
or
then unprofessional, even though, like I said, at the highest levels of government, all these words have been used. But if, say for yourself, if you don't wish to define yourself that way, then you can choose to use language that represents a more professional, self-managed person. It's every act is an act of self-definition. So how do you want to define yourself? That's the question.
And if you're in a professional setting and everybody's cursing and you're looking at them like the school marm, that really does make people kind of listen to themselves, because what they're trying to do is intimidate you by using vulgar language and aggressive and sexually violent language. Yeah. And that's the thing. And so we do not want to teach our children to use aggressive and sexually violent language as a normal part of speaking. What the F is not necessary in all the time. That's the thing, is that we've gotten to the point where it is such a natural course. People don't realize you actually don't need to use that language.
Right. Exactly. We'll respond as the famous words of our dear First Lady Michelle Obama: when they go low, we go high.
We go high.
So there you go. Well, it's been great. I'm so grateful for those of you who have watched and tuned in. Make sure you like and subscribe to our Facebook page and YouTube channel so you get regular notes when we go live every Sunday, 5 Central, 6 Eastern, and wherever you are in the world, just adjust your time so you can watch us and feel free to comment. So until next week, I'm Naima.
I'm Cheryl.
I'm Barbara. We are 3 Black moms. Hi, I'm Barbara.
I'm Cheryl.
And I'm Naima. We're 3 Black moms.